review chapter, I then try to bring together what we may have discerned of Mary as she was remembered by the early Church, particularly bearing in mind Fiorenza's dictum. Throughout these parts of my study, so far as I can, I use the normal tools of literary and historical criticism, confining my inquiry to the limits imposed by those disciplines. In this connection, I make no apology for favoring as witnesses over all other written sources of information the four canonical Gospels and other documents of the canonical New Testament. As I claimed some years ago in my Resurrection of the Messiah, with particular reference to the Passion and Resurrection narratives, and as Simon Gathercole has shown recently in his magisterial The Gospel and the Gospels, with reference to the Gospels as a whole, what the canonical Gospels, including John, have in common against the non-canonical Gospels is a profound commitment to the preached gospel of the Church, the kerygma, to which Paul witnesses at 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verses 1 through 11. That kerygma was evidently early. Paul himself received it, and it appeared to Paul, who was surely in a position to know, to be universal. Whether it was I or they, so we preach, and so you believed. A view that is amply borne out by the evidence. The kerygma itself, moreover, especially in its estimate of Jesus, is most plausibly understood as in its origins tied directly into the memory of those who had known Jesus personally, experienced him personally, and listened to his words. It would follow, then, that they had also personally experienced those who were about him during his ministry, including naturally his mother. While it is true that the Church of the first Christian centuries did not have the Scriptures or the ecumenical creeds as we have them, every source of information that we have makes clear that it was never without the apostolic gospel to which the Scriptures and creeds point, aptly summarized by Gathercole, that Jesus is the Messiah, who in fulfillment of Israel's Scripture died a vicarious death and rose again on the third day. Of course, one need not therefore simply dismiss other early Christian writings as possible sources of information about the first Christians. It is always possible that genuine tradition from the earliest days may be preserved even in documents which appear in general to be distanced from them. That, however, does not justify an attitude which became fashionable in some scholarly circles towards the end of the 20th century, an attitude which set the non-canonical or apocryphal Gospels and the canonical Gospels side by side, as if they were more or less equal resources for information about Jesus and his earliest followers. That they most certainly are not. On the contrary, as John P. Meyer put it, most of this material, while having historical interest for a study of the picture of Jesus through the centuries, probably has nothing to do with the quest for the historical Jesus. I concur with that judgment entirely, save that I would probably have deleted probably. The result of all this in the present work is a series of chapters that are of very uneven lengths, and that, of course, is because the materials with which I am dealing in the 6 witnesses are of uneven lengths. I have considered breaking the material up in some other way so as to avoid this. But the fact is the authors with whom I am dealing, although all looking to the same Lord and making essentially the same proclamation about him, are all also very much themselves, with their own styles and their own immediate concerns. Studying them each in their own plainly individual chapters is, I think, the best way of acknowledging, and indeed benefiting from this. It may well be, however, that any who use this volume as a basis for study will find it helpful to consider at least the chapter on Luke in 2 sessions. In one, considering the narratives of Annunciation and Nativity, in a second, the narratives of Jesus' circumcision, presentation in the temple, youthful visit to Jerusalem, and Mary's appearance in Acts. Following all this, and again in accord with my usual practice, in a postscript I reflect on the relationship between our 6 New Testament witnesses and subsequent Christian understanding of